So welcome everyone to our next workshop on learning how to study social interactions online. So Oana is going to guide us through how she's used different platforms to figure out how we can kind of take what we typically do in the lab and actually study it, using online conversations between people. And we are super lucky today to have a guest with us, Andras Molnar. Did I say your last name correctly? I should have asked about that as well. Okay. Who's from Carnegie Mellon, and he has done a ton of work to try to figure out how to use these platforms to move forward social science research to study interactions. So Andras, do you want to just say a couple words about yourself before Oana kind of launches into the workshop?
Yeah, so just to say a few words about myself. So I study social interactions, and as I study those, it's really important for me to have like real-time interaction between participants. And that motivated me to develop this platform. That the idea here is that it allows researchers to set up interactions without having to program anything. So it's just using the Qualtrics survey engine, and it's a drag and drop design. So basically, you don't have to learn any fancy programming language like Python or JavaScript. You just use these existing blocks, and you can build whatever experiment you want.
Awesome. Yeah, so we're super excited to see this in action. And Oana is going to share with us one of her own studies and also show us what it looks like to be in that study so we can see from the participants' view what this experience is like. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Oana to move forward, and I'm going to mute my screen.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Tessa and Andras. Okay, so I think to start off, I'm going to first do a little demo of ChatPlat. So when we were first starting to think about transferring our studies to an online environment, the first thing that we heard of and that I've seen in some papers is ChatPlat. And ChatPlat also can be incorporated into Qualtrics, but as we will probably see later on, it has some limitations that I think Smartriqs deals with very successfully. But that being said, if you're just looking to have one chat in your study, or you don't have like very complicated like conditions or things like that, ChatPlat is, I think, a good solution too. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Yes. Okay.
Can I just add one thing here?
Yeah, of course.
So I know like ChatPlat is basically a competitor, but I'm not getting any profit from this, so I don't really care. So one important difference that I wanted to highlight, that ChatPlat, one of the big advantages that it's platform independent. So the good thing is that you can use ChatPlat not only in Qualtrics, but even if you set up your own website, even if you like, it's compatible with basically any other platform. Whereas Smartriqs is only compatible with Qualtrics, right? So I wanted to make this clear that that's one of the huge differences between the two.
Awesome, thank you. I had no idea. I've only used ChatPlat in Qualtrics too, so I didn't like look beyond that, but that's a very good point. So with ChatPlat, you have to create an account. It's very straightforward. There's no like special permissions or anything like that. And then it's, again, pretty straightforward. You have the option to create a ChatPlat. I'm going to show you one that we actually used for a study that we ran last summer. So this is where you would look at the study details. So this is whenever you create a new chat, you have to determine these things. So like ChatPlat name, obviously you want this to be something as descriptive as possible and as helpful for you to remember what the chat is about. And then you can set a time that you want the chat to go on for. So in my case, I wanted it to be for 10 minutes. And then group limit, I wanted this to be a dyadic interaction, so I had 2 participants. And so it has 2 options. One of them is grouping strategy by first come, first serve. So this would just basically welcome participants into the chat regardless of their like role or condition or anything like that. or you can do enhanced participant pairing. And so in this case, you want to make sure that whatever you name your roles, so in my case, they're top and bottom, because a little bit of background, we were assigning participants to score either in the top 25% of score takers on a certain test or in the bottom 25%. So to me, top and bottom were pretty suggestive. I stuck with that. And so the thing that you do need to be careful of is making sure that, just give me 1 second, is making sure that whatever name you're using in Chatplat, you also have as embedded data for your conditions in Qualtrics. Because I've only used this in Qualtrics, I don't know how that would work on different like survey platforms, but I'm assuming there probably are ways to determine your conditions in there too. So this is the Qualtrics survey that I put this chat into. So if you go to survey flow, here, if they scored in the top 25% of test takers, then I would make this embedded data role equals to top. And if they scored in the bottom 25%, then I would make this embedded data role equals to bottom. And if you have questions about how to set embedded data or what that means, I suggest you watch our previous Qualtrics workshop, because we Ashley and Karina from our lab did a really good job of explaining that. So yeah, this is the most important thing with Chatplat, is just making sure that these roles match if you're doing enhanced participant pairing. All right, and then you have a bunch of options here, like allowing them to have emojis or not, or things like that. And then you can enable a chat expiration warning. So this will let them know when they have about, in my case, 60 seconds remaining before the chat ends. And things like letting them see when the other person's typing, or seeing timestamps. Okay, so these are the basic settings that you need to make. So then going back to Qualtrics, the way you would embed this into Qualtrics is you would go to instructions. So every chat that you create will have this instructions block, and then it has a specific Qualtrics integration instructions. And so in my case, because I was doing enhanced participant pairing with roles such as top and bottom, I looked specifically at these instructions. And so it's essentially telling you what I just told you, that you need to identify these like that. And then since I am identifying participants with their response ID from Qualtrics, all I had to do is copy paste this text right here. And then if I just go to my survey, I have this block right here that I named chat. So here they're getting instructions for the chat. In this case, we're asking them to think about characteristics that a president for a liberal arts college in Maryland would need to have. So that's their topic of discussion. And then here, if I double click on this, so in the normal view, it just appears as Chatplat, but if you go to HTML view, this is the text that I just copied before. And so if you notice here, it's identifying the role. So it's always going to pair someone who's top with someone who's bottom and vice versa. And then it's also giving you their Qualtrics ID so that you can identify who was the person who was top and who was bottom when the data gets exported. So one thing about Chatplat that it's, I guess, entertaining if you're running your first study online is you actually get to like watch them interact in real time. So here's an example of two participants who were having a conversation. And so this actually appears in real time. So you can actually watch them, and I guess it kind of gives you a little bit of reassurance that there's actually people interacting in there. But however, that being said, whenever you want to export the data, you have to export it from Chatplat, not from Qualtrics. So there's always this like kind of having to link Chatplat with Qualtrics. Not a big deal, but you know. Cool. So I think that's the main thing that I wanted to say about Chatplat. You can always edit the details of your chat if you just go to edit details. And as far as I know, I think maybe they have a limit of like 10 or 15 people. If anyone knows different, correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, so you can have as many people, hopefully, as you would need. Maybe not like in the hundreds, but quite a lot. Okay, does anyone have any questions, or did I skip anything or regarding Chatplat? No, okay, cool. All right, so this was really good for me when I first started doing this, and I did a bunch of like pilot tests because I was interested in these manipulations that we were using. But my study, my main line of research, I guess, is concerned with how newcomers get integrated into groups. So what I needed ideally, and what we started doing in the lab, was to have two people interact with each other, have them establish some sort of, relationship, and then have a third person join as a newcomer. And so my main interest is in what happens to this third person, and depending on their status, how do they get integrated into the group. So as far as I know, and this might be totally wrong, I haven't looked into it recently, but as far as I know, I don't think Chatplat allows you to have two people in the chat and then bring the same two people back in the chat after completing some tasks. And I also don't know how you would go about adding a third person to the chat. So that being said, that was a roadblock that I ran into, and then I kind of let it go, and we started running this study in the lab, and then the coronavirus happened, and so I went back, and I discovered Smartriqs, which was extremely helpful. So, okay, now I'm going to move on, and first, actually, I want to show everyone all of the things regarding Smartriqs that you can find. So first, there's an entire website, and there are a bunch of demos in here. So to create my study, I actually had to look at different demos and sort of borrow things from one study and then other things from another study and so on. But they're very straightforward and very easy to understand. And so this will take you to an OSF page where you can download all of these templates. So you'll see when I tried doing this, I had a bunch of like tries, like surveys that I imported to be able to look at them. I didn't even know that you could upload Qualtrics surveys from files, but this is what this allows you to do. So if you just download one of these and then you go to Qualtrics, and let's say you want to create a new project. Sorry, it's working kind of slow. Yeah, so if you wanted to create a new project, you can do so from a file. And if you just open up one of these templates, it's just going to create a new survey for you and show you all of the blocks. So really all you have to do after that is figure out what each block is doing and then use it in your own study or copy it and so on in your own study. So if you go to create your own survey, you can create a survey from a file, and then you can go here and then you can choose the file that just got downloaded, which, sorry, my computer is a little bit of a mess, but it would be in the downloads folder. All right, so that's one of the things. So there's an entire OSF page. And then if you just type Smartriqs into Google Scholar, I don't know why this is showing up in Romanian, but just it's just Google Scholar. You will find a paper by Andras where there's a lot of very useful information. And then there's also like a lot of, so this is a lot of information about how to use Smartriqs. And then there's also a, the other paper, which explains, it talks about actual like empirical data and like attrition rates and so on. I just switched those up, right? Did I?
Yeah, so the first paper is just a conceptual overview, and this one is in the first paper that demonstrates that how it works. And the second paper, I believe that's more useful because that's actually describing how to use it.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So this is mainly what I used to figure out how to do all of this. But then this is also very useful in terms of like, if you ever have to like, I don't know, make an argument for like why running a study online is like equivalent to like almost equivalent to doing one in the lab and so on. This is very interesting because it talks about attrition rates and so on. So that's just to say all of this information is out there. I'm just going to show you how I like use this to create my own study, but there's a lot of documentation out there accessible to everyone. Okay, so now I'm going to go to what I call the newcomer study. And as I said before, this is a study where I want 3 people in total, but I want the first 2 to interact with each other. And then later on have the 3rd person come and join. So as you can see, I had a lot of tries in here until I figured it out. And to be fair, if I had thought of emailing Andras sooner and I had known that he would just reply very quickly like he did, I probably would have had less tries, but it was an interesting learning process anyway. Okay, so most of what you have to do will actually happen in survey flow. So that's where I'm going to go right now. So if I understand correctly, at the beginning of the study, there's a set of embedded data that you need to set. So the first one, researcher ID, is you get by registering with Smartriqs. Again, it doesn't cost anything. It's just going to give you a researcher ID, and then you input that in all of the studies that you're doing. And then the study ID is, again, like in Chatblat, something that is identifies your study and is like suggestive. Group ID, I don't think you need to fill out, at least I didn't see that in the instructions. And then participant ID, you would just match to the Qualtrics ID. The group size is, in my case, the size of the group, like the biggest group that you'll ever have in the chat. So I want 3 people in the chat, so the group size is 3. And then the number of stages is 2 because I will have 2 interactions, one for the dyad and one for the triad. So I realized that the number of stages should be 2 actually later on when I realized that I would want a waiting room for both of the interactions. So that's actually one of the other really great advantages of this is there is a waiting room for participants to wait for the other 2, which is great because it eliminates a lot of the problems of people waiting for each other in the chat, and you make sure that everyone gets to interact for the same amount of time. Then in the roles, you would specify the conditions for each person. So in my case, I have a person A, a person B, and a person C. And then a participant role, if you set it to random, my understanding is that Smartriqs is just going to randomly assign one person to be A, one person to be B, and one person to be C, and that's what they will be matched. So they will form a match once. Actually, I think the correct way is they form a match and then they like randomly get assigned one to be A, one to B. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I think you can also not do it randomly, but then you're likely going to have to wait more for the match to happen. Okay, timeout log. I'm not sure if maybe that's something that we can talk about at the end, or yeah, what is
So
timeout
that
block?
is something, so normally you can just ignore that. That's not really important. That's just a variable that captures if there was any error. So for example, if one participant drops out, or if there was like some participant got inactive, then that variable is going to save whatever happened.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, so that would show up in the output. And then conditions are group level conditions. So if I understand correctly. So in my case, I have two conditions. So in the dyad, participants A and participant A is always high in status and participant B is always low in status. However, what varies is whether participant C, who's the newcomer, is high in status or low in status. So in that way, I have two group level conditions, one where the newcomer is high and one where the newcomer is low. So that's why here for conditions, I have low and high. And again, whether the newcomer is going to be low or high is going to be randomly decided. So here,
sorry, before you move forward, can I just make like a really quick clarification for those who might have missed the group level thing?
Yeah.
So it's the newcomer's condition, but the whole group of three is going to vary of what that condition is. So in some groups of three, that newcomer is going to be high, and in some groups of three, that newcomer is going to be low. And that's why it's a variable that varies at the level of the group, not at the level of the individual participant, right? So it's like technically referencing who the newcomer is, but in some groups that newcomer is low, and in some groups that's high, and that's why. I want to just make that level issue clear.
Yeah, so it's just trying to make sure that, you know, participant A doesn't get told that the newcomer is high and participant B gets told that the newcomer is low. It's just so everyone's on the same page, basically.
Perfect.
Yeah. And then there's another set of embedded data where you can choose whether they get matched with a bot and then whether they get an alert when they get matched. So the alert is simply letting them know that they have been matched with the number of participants that they weren't waiting to be matched with. And then, to be honest, I haven't tried the bot match. I'm extremely curious what that does. So, Andras, if you want to tell us a little bit about that, like, is it an AI?
So that one only occurs if there are not enough participants available. So you can also specify like how long participants can wait, like what is the maximum waiting time. By default, it's, I believe, 3 minutes. So if there is no one else available to form a group, then either the survey is terminated, that's the default, so it just stops, and it displays a message, or if you set this bot match, then actually they are matched with the bot. Unfortunately, there is no like chat function there, so in your study it wouldn't work. But for example, if you are playing an allocation game or some kind of other decision making where you can set up default responses or randomized responses, then you can use that. And that might be useful, for example, if you're running larger groups, let's say like 8 people, and if only 7 shows up, you can still start a study and one of the participants is going to be just a default response. So that's the bot match. And yeah, and you can also use the default responses without bots. So this is like a nuanced difference, but in one case, it's an actual computer that makes this default response. In the other case, that can happen if someone times out. For example, if someone takes too much time on a decision and you don't want to force the others to wait forever, so you just apply this default response. But in this case, everyone was a human. One of these decisions just got overridden. So anyway, so if you're interested in knowing more about this distinction between bots and default responses, there is also a section on that.
Yeah. So another. Sorry, go on.
Just a quick question about that. So because we're often doing like interactive tasks, would it be possible to have bot then just forward to someone who's like working on the study, like a confederate, or are there like would there be a different set of like rules? Because like it would be nice if someone could like interact with someone, but then set it up where bot match just puts them with like someone on the team.
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, Oana, can you go back a little bit, like scroll up to the main variables? Yeah, so here, so that's exactly the best use for the changing the participant role. So right now it's set to random, which means that whenever a group is formed, the roles are just allocated randomly. But imagine that you are having two roles, like one is the actual participant, the other is the confederate. So in the survey, the participant role would be set to, let's say, A, which is the participant. And then you would have a separate survey when the participant role is B, and that would be the confederate. So whoever opens this link, they can only join as the actual participant, and whoever opens the other link can join as the confederate. So that would be a way to set that up. But yeah, it's certainly possible.
Awesome. Thank you for that. That was a really good question, Ashley, actually. Okay, so these are the variables that we set at the beginning of the study, and then in my case, they would go to informed consent, and then they would be given an intro where we tell them about the test that they're about to take. And then after that, the actual matching happens right here. So this is the match block. Again, like I don't really know what is going on. I tried to look at the JavaScript, but it seems very complicated. All you need to know is as long as you set these parameters to be what you want them to be, it's going to match the number of participants that you want it to match. And so, as I mentioned before, we have this conditions variable right here, which is low or high. To make it easier for myself, I also created an embedded data called condition C, just so I can remember that that's participant C's condition. And so if they got randomly assigned to be low in status, then I obviously named this low, and same for high. Okay, and then this is a lot of sort of branching that we talked about last time, where here I have basically there's a lot of conditions. So participant A is high in status, and they are part of the dyad. So they're not a newcomer. Participant B is low in status. They're also not a newcomer. And then I have the newcomer who can either be low or be high. So this is where knowing how to use Qualtrics in a slightly more advanced way is very helpful, because you need to do all these conditions and show them different instructions depending on what role they have. But so here I'm giving them instructions. So these are instructions for the dyad. These are instructions for the newcomer. And then they have to take this test that we call the person inside test. And then they get randomly, well, participant A always gets assigned to be high status, and participant B always gets assigned to be low in status. And then this is a block where I basically make them aware of their dyad interaction partner's status as well. So participant A always knows that participant B has low status and vice versa. And then the same thing happens for participant C, but this time, again, you need to make sure that this is consistent with whatever was assigned to this group. So whether the newcomer was assigned to be high or low. And so again, different sets of feedback for high and low status. Okay. So then we move on to this part where I want the dyad to engage in an interaction, and I also want the third participant to be doing something else at the same time. So normally if we were in the lab, our like classic thing that we do is we tell the newcomer that we're just going to start a little later, and if they can wait a little bit. And then while the dyad is interacting, we have them do the consent and so on. But in this case, they actually start at the same time, which is actually an advantage, I think, because you make sure that they get matched and you actually have a set of 3 people instead of like realizing later that there's no newcomer, which can happen in a lab too. So in this set of embedded data, my understanding is you're defining these 2 variables, dyad log and triad log. I named them that in this case, but it could really just be like chat1, chat2, or whatever you want. And then I'm guessing by telling it that it's equal to text, you're defining that this is going to be a text file thing.
So actually, yeah, that's a secret. So don't tell anyone else. That's redundant. So it doesn't matter what you put in there. I just wanted to keep it simple and intuitive. So the only important thing is that it shouldn't be empty, because when it's empty, it doesn't recognize. So I just wanted to put a placeholder there. But it gets, so these are the variables where the actual chat log is going to be saved. So when you're going to download the results from Qualtrics, in that cell, you are going to see the whole log of the chat.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, it's actually very convenient that it's text, because I totally thought you were just defining a text field or something. Okay, so this is where you're telling it basically that there's going to be 2 chats, or I'm telling it that. And then here again, I have to branch out. So if we're talking about participant A or participant B, this is what's going to happen. They're going to complete a pre-dyad questionnaire where I'm asking them a bunch of questions and checking that the manipulation worked. And then this is the wonderful waiting room, which I'm so happy exists. For the waiting room, you need to have another set of embedded data where you set out these parameters. I don't think these, I haven't changed these. I literally just took them from one of the templates that I found on OSF. The only thing that I will say matters here is if this is the first chat, then send stage should be 1. And if it's the second chat, it should be 2, and so on, just so it knows to differentiate the 2. I also renamed this send block, and I added waiting room here to distinguish it for myself. And so after this embedded data, you have the send block, and then another set of embedded data where you're telling it who the participants are. In my case, I want A and B to wait for each other. Get stage, again, is 1 if this is your first chat. Save data, I'm not exactly sure what this is for. I just know that it was null in all of the templates that I looked at.
So the reason, because I'm using the send and the get blocks for any kind of decision to be transmitted, and normally you want to save that. For example, if it's a dictator game or they make a public decision, you want to save those data, because this is just a waiting room. It doesn't make any sense to save those, so
right.
It is just empty.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and then get wait text is just whatever you want to tell your participants while they are waiting for each other. Okay, and then you have get block. So I think my understanding for all of these is there's always a send and get block, right? To, like, I guess, save the data.
Yeah, so what they mean is that you can see that above each of the send and the get blocks, there are these embedded variables that you have to define. And essentially what they do is really intuitive. So whenever there is send block, you are sending those embedded data to the server. And when there is a get block, you are trying to retrieve data from the server. So in this case, if you can scroll up a little bit, what it does is that it sends like each participant's status as ready for the stage 1. So then it's going to be stored on the server. And then after that, it's going to retrieve the data from both A and B from the first stage. And when it's ready, so when both of them are ready, then it concludes, and then you can proceed.
Awesome. Okay. Okay. Yeah. And then after we're done with the waiting room, we have another set of embedded data right before the chat block. And so here you're telling it which chat name. So in my case, this is the dyad chat. So I'm going to tell it that this is the dyad interaction, and this is where it's going to get saved. You're telling it a chat duration. So I want them to talk for about 5 minutes. So that's 300 seconds. Allow exit chat is whether they see this like little icon that would allow them to exit the chat. I set that to no to minimize the rate of attrition, or just to make sure that they're going to try to talk for as much for the whole time. And then here you just write the chat instructions. I had a entire block of instructions before with more detail, but you can also write it right here. Okay, and then there's the chat block, which again, I renamed this as dyad chat, but what this is literally just a imported block from one of the templates on OSF. Okay, and then after they're done with the chat, they're going to do a post-dyad questionnaire, and then they're going to be given instructions for what we call the triad task. So when the newcomer joins, they're going to have to pick the best candidate for a job. And so what actually happens in this experiment is participant C, who's a newcomer, always has more information about the job candidates than participants A and B. Yeah, and so that's why it's again essential to separate instructions for A and B from instructions that C has. So again, if participant C is high, they would now be told that they're going to be joined by another participant, and they also took the person inside test, and now they're going to see their score. And same if participant C is low, they would see that they're low. And then there's a bunch of other questions that we ask them about how they feel about this newcomer coming in. All right, so this, if you see, is all under this branch that is telling Qualtrics that all of these things should happen only if participant role is A or participant role is B. So while participants A and B go through this whole thing, participant C gets to go through this branch where we're making them watch a nature video. And so the nature video lasts about 5 minutes. It's supposed to hopefully help line up the dyad interaction with the video so that at the end of both of these things, everyone is hopefully ready to do the 3-person interaction. And then they also get instructions, and they're also told their partner scores. All right, so the task that I just described where one participant has more information is called the hidden profile task. So they're going to get instructions for that. And so here again, if the participant is A or B, they're both going to get the same candidate profiles. But if their role is C, so if they're newcomer, they're going to get a different set of profiles, and they're going to include more information. So this is one of those things where it's, again, really important to make sure that these branch out the way that they should and make sure that everyone gets the information that you want them to. All right, so then they're going to all go through a few more questionnaires about how they feel about the upcoming interaction, challenge and threat, and then again, a manipulation check. And then we made it to the second and last chat, where again, following the same structure as the dyad one, you have to set the embedded data here. And in this case, notice that send stage is 2 because, oh, actually this is a waiting room. So send stage 2 because this is the second interaction, and then a send block. And then this time in get data, you're telling it that you're waiting for participants A, B, and C. Get stage is 2 again. Save data is again saved to null. And then the same, whatever text you want to be displayed while they're waiting. All right, a get block again. So by this point, the waiting room would be done. And then here you would set, again, the embedded data for the chat. I renamed this to be triad chat, but again, just a simple chat block. And this time I'm telling it that the chat name is triad log, so it's going to save all this information in a different variable than it did last time. And this time I want them to interact for 10 minutes, so I'm going to set it to 600 seconds. And this is just for my own peace of mind to kind of know what's going on, chat between the entire group, and you can tell them that they can hit enter or send message to send a message. Again, you can customize this as you wish. And then after the triad chat block, I also, so this actually has 6 questions in here because I wanted to make sure that they can still see the candidate profiles while they're interacting with each other. So above everyone's like chats block, there is a set of candidate profiles. Okay, and then there's the complete block, which does that just send all of the data, like I'm not exactly sure what it does.
So that is actually entirely optional. So it doesn't really require for like Smartriqs to function, but it helps you. So if you are using the progress monitor, which is this other tool that lets you see in real time how data collection goes, that's going to tell you if a group finished without any issues. So then you're going to receive like a status update, but it doesn't affect the collected data in any way.
Okay. Cool. Okay, so that, yeah, and this is where the chat part of it basically ends, and then I have a bunch of other questions, and again, they all have to be like customized to the person. So if the person's A, they get a set of questions. If the person's B, they get another set of questions, and they're C, they get another set. So yeah, so that is pretty much it. I want to see if I actually have, I think I have a, maybe not on here, but I can actually just show you the chat now. Let me just see if, I might have to ask 2 of my RAs to help, but yeah, in the meantime, if anyone has questions while I get this set up, I'm just trying to be on like 3 devices at the same time, so.
So if you don't set the save survey progress and the prevent battle box stuffing, then you can open it within the same browser like as many times as you want.
Oh, got it. Okay. Oh, so I can be on just one computer with 3 browsers. Cool. Okay, let me see. All right. Okay, so this is just some questions that they have to complete before they start the chat. All right, so this was like a few seconds of the waiting room for the dyad chat because I was already ready as participant B, but I'm, you know, if this is me from another computer and then I can do the same thing here. So it's just to demonstrate that it is indeed working, and then it's showing you that the remaining time is 4:33. And then on my phone here, I have the, I don't know if you guys can see, but it's the nature video that participant C would be watching. So these would all be happening at the same time, hopefully. And then once this chat is done and the video is done, all 3 of them would move on to the next stage. And so one thing that I emailed Andras about and that he was very helpful with is things that you can do to make sure that the participants actually line up and that the chat doesn't go inactive. So one of them is setting the maximum wait time to the maximum possible, which I think is 10 minutes. And another thing is while they are going through the questions, like for instance, for the person insight test, you can set timers on those questions to make sure that even if someone goes through those questions very quickly, they still can't move on to the next page until there's like at least 10 seconds have passed or something like that. Cool, so this is gonna go on for 3.5 more minutes, but this is the gist of it. Again, here, like these are the fields that I showed you before where I just wrote dyad chat, but you could write anything you wanted if you wanted to put instructions in there or anything like that. So yeah, again, I just want to point out that there's a lot of information on this in both of Andras's papers and on OSF and on the website. And yeah, I think that's all I had to say.
May I interrupt for a sec?
Yeah, of course.
So since you're already waiting, so now I think you can also show the progress monitor that lets the researchers see like how the actual collection goes.
Oh, okay. So
Or have you used it before?
I have not.
Oh, great. So if you go to the website, I think the link is somewhere.
The website for Smartriqs?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And there, I think it should be in the Getting Started tab somewhere. Yeah, in the left menu, there is a progress monitor under bots. Yeah, and click on the link. There was a huge, yeah. And here you basically just have to enter your research ID and the study ID for the study that you're currently running.
Got it. Okay, so the study's Newcomer 2. Let me just go get my research ID. Wait, where am I?
And again, this is like not essential for it to function. This is only just for your peace of mind, because then you can see, like I have this different color coding. For example, when it's red, it means that one participant has dropped out.
Right.
You want them to have completed in green. So that means, so if you scroll down and have those green lines, those mean that the entire group has finished it without any issues.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, it's for everyone to know. I think this is like all of these are all of my tabs that I've opened and not finished. So I don't think it normally looks like this.
You can also see the bots that, for example, if you went down there, yeah, so when you see that there is a bot instead of that R underscore and that weird string, it means that there was no available participants, so they got matched with bots.
Got it. Okay. Wow, that's awesome. I knew there was a progress thing, but it just, it seemed like it would be complicated for me to access it, but this is awesome. So this basically is one of the things that I really liked about Chatbot, is that you could like monitor it directly, but this is actually a much more like compiled way of looking at it. Cool. Okay. Does anyone have questions for, I mean, for me less so, but for Andras maybe, and I'm sure like there's a bunch of other ideas for studies that people would probably want to make. I think I can stop. Can I stop sharing the screen? Does anyone need? No. Okay.
I have a quick question. So if, let's say you're in the chat that you just showed and someone just exits out or they lose their connection, what happens then? Like, will it say like participant C left the chat? Like, will it give an alert to the other participant?
I believe so, right? Every time someone leaves the chat or becomes inactive, they get notified.
So everyone in the chat does.
So that depends on how they exit the chat. Because, for example, if they use that button, if you set the allow exit chat and they exit that way, then everyone gets a notification. Or for example, when the timer expires, then everyone else gets a notification. The problem is that if they lose the connection, then of course, there is no way to transmit that information to the server. So in that case, the other participants won't see that this participant has timed out. But when in the next waiting room, they are going to learn if this participant has dropped out or not.
Okay. Thanks.
And also, so one good thing with Qualtrics, so even if they have a network connection issue, but if you save the survey progress, and for example, they get back their internet 2 minutes later, they can continue wherever they were. And for example, the same stage of chat, so then you won't lose any progress.
That's awesome.
I just have a question about the sort of specifications when we're like, you were saying that we could put in metadata for if like there was an issue with this study, and like if we then within that have to code for the different types of issues that come up, or if like downloading whatever is in OSF will just have all of that already like in there, just like, because I'm thinking I don't know like what issues could happen because I've never done this before. So yeah, I don't know.
So are you referring to the timeout log, that variable that saves the issues, or what?
Yes.
Yes, all the templates contain all these essential parts. They are all working, and these so the good thing is that these blocks, like the match block that Oana showed, or the chat block, or the get and the send block, they are identical. So it doesn't really matter which template you download, because you can just copy the exact same chat block, and without touching it and without editing any of the script, it will work in all of your studies. And so that variable, the timeout log, it's going to tell you in like full sentences what happened. So you don't need like to interpret it. It's going to tell you that participant A dropped out in stage 3 or something like that. So I hope it's really intuitive, and ideally it's going to say that, okay, I think that's the default. If there is no issues, if everyone completed it, then that variable is going to say that, I don't remember, but either it says it's ready or okay. So it's going to be intuitive.
I also just have like a general thought, and like this is more just based off like content, so not as much on procedure. But like one, I was just from that one example that you showed me, and like from previous like work on MTurk with getting people to write stuff out, like some of the stuff that people write is like really off. Like it just seems like they're not, like the example we read, like one of the people, like they kept responding in like all caps, and then like we're like, I'm going to SeaWorld. I don't know, I was just like confused by that. But I also have this experience, and so I was wondering like, I don't know what your thoughts are on that, and like if maybe Prolific has people who don't respond like that, or if that's just kind of how people talk online more so.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to like officially endorse either MTurk or Prolific, but yeah, I will say I think when I ran this on Prolific, I got more like, I'd say more involved responses, and every, if someone like timed out, which happened for a few people, like they were actually really upset, and they emailed me and they were like, I put in so much work into this, like why won't you let me take your study? So I think it's slightly better, but no matter what, like you're always gonna get like a few one-offs. I'm sorry I happened to actually show you that particular like weird example. There were some other better ones. Like this one participant at some point was like, type 25 if you're a real person, and then the person actually typed 25, and then he was like, wow, this is the first time I'm like having an actual interaction online, like every time it's like bots or whatever. And then they actually talked about what they were supposed to talk about, but yeah, that was
cool. Yeah, I'm like, I'm not like judging any of that at all. I was just thinking that's happened to me too, and I'm just like wondering how common it is, and like just because we are probably going to have to shift to using this a lot in the near future, like I was just like, oh no, is this like how most of the data is? Like yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes that happens in the lab too. Like you can't monitor what they do, but it's true that online it's like inevitably going to happen a little more. But that being said, like I'm not saying that's something you should do, but you do have the option to like reject their submission on MTurk and Prolific if you think that they didn't pay attention or things like that. That's why I think it's really important to have attention checks all throughout, because a lot of times, like if you do decide to reject their submission, participants might email you and be like, what was the attendance, like what did I fail, why are you not? And again, I like in general, I think it's, the best thing to do is to pay people for their time. But if you think they like really didn't take it seriously and they just messed around, then that will also, every worker on MTurk and Prolific has a certain like approval rate. So in that way, it's kind of like you're way of signaling to others that they may not be a reliable participant, maybe.
Yeah, I think definitely also I'll have to, if I ever do end up doing Confederate work on here, which I know we probably won't, but if that is the case, I would love to chat, because obviously I think that means like we need to have typos and things like that. I'm just like systematizing that is interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and also another thing is when you set your like sample preferences on Prolific and MTurk, I'm sure most people are aware of this, but you can actually choose to only have participants who have over like 90% approval rate or something like that. So if they're like known for really not taking things seriously, then you're probably not going to get them in your study. I'm not sure what my criteria was for this particular MTurk study, but.
Thanks.
May I have a comment on that? So I've recruited, I think by now, over 40,000 participants on either MTurk or Prolific. And in my experience, you should use the highest possible approval rating. So like either 99 or 100%, because the distribution of these approval ratings is so skewed that if you're going to only 90%, then you're going to get a lot of inattentive workers. So my recommendation, either if you use Prolific or MTurk, to set either just 100%. If you only need a few hundred people, you're easily going to get that many. If you need thousands of workers for a single study, then probably set it at 99%. And that way you can get rid of most of these inattentive workers.
That's really good to know. I thought like somewhere around like 90 would be enough, but 99 is, yeah.
So you're saying
one issue is that most researchers never reject anyone. So imagine that if someone has a 90% approval rate, it means that every 10% of their submission was rejected, which is absolutely horrible,
Yeah.
knowing that very few people actually do reject.
That's super useful to know. So do you almost exclusively select 100% unless you need, say, 10,000 people and then maybe 95% or something like that? Okay.
So I never use 95% is already really low. So
Okay.
if I need thousands of people in a single day, then I use 98 maybe, but 99 is the preferred.
Okay, so we run much smaller studies than you do, so we could probably get away with 100 then. So let's update our thinking on that, everyone. This is super useful because when we start doing these things online, we actually don't know little insider tricks like this for transferring our lab studies to the internet. So thanks.
And I also don't want to endorse either of these platforms, but my impression is absolutely consistent with Oana. So Prolific has, like, so far attention check rates are much higher in my studies there. And for example, the open-ended responses are much more substantive, which suggests that it's not only just more attentive workers. To me, it seems that the pool has a little bit different characteristics. So in my impression, people are not professional workers on Prolific. Whereas on MTurk, because you have all these industrial hits, you have people who work full-time for MTurk. And they do these machine learning tasks the whole day. But on Prolific, you only do scientific studies. And of course, you can't do it for a full-time job because there are not enough studies to be posted. So in my impression, Prolific has a slightly more naive participant pool, which might be really useful.
I have another question for you since you're so experienced with this. Have you noticed any differences in the demographics or the makeup of your Prolific participants pre and post COVID, especially given differences in economic certainty and things like that? Like, have you noticed a shift in average income, socioeconomic status, anything like that?
So not really. My impression was that, so both these pools, both MTurk and Prolific, tends to be like overrepresenting younger, lower income population than the general US. And especially if you want like representative with respect to ethnicity, that's the trickiest because it's predominantly white. So I think that 90% of MTurk or Prolific samples are overwhelmingly white. So it's really difficult to sample from other ethnicities. But I haven't noticed a shift in either age, gender, or income in terms
Okay.
of that.
Yeah, one thing we worry a little bit in the social sciences is, and I know Karina, one of the people on this call, has been dealing with this, is trying to replicate the exact same paradigm pre and post COVID. And if it doesn't replicate, we don't know if it's just because of error or it just doesn't replicate, or if it's because of, you know, contextual factors have shifted sort of in meaningful psychological ways, or just a really mundane explanation of just the people that are now making up these pools have completely changed, or we're getting flooded with new unemployment or things like that. So it's good to know that you've done some systematic looking at this and haven't found at least that kind of third explanation bearing out. So, but I do think it's something we should keep in mind as we move forward and, you know, look at the shift, look to make sure there isn't a huge shift over time, or if there is, account for it in some way.
But I will also like to add that my studies are really unrelated to COVID. But for example, if you study risk attitudes or, I don't know, pro-social behavior or political attitudes, then there might be a strong shift in there. But since I study like non-political beliefs, I didn't really expect to find any difference.
Yeah, I'm interested by the fact that you said that it's hard to find non-white samples, and I typically only study people who are not white, and so I'm just curious if I up it to 100%, if that is gonna, how that would affect the rate of data collection for me. But like, I don't know, do you think that would still be possible?
So the good thing is that with Prolific, you can actually set these pre-screeners. So if you want to sample from a target population, you can certainly do that. And it's for free. That's a huge difference between Mturk and Prolific. So on Mturk, you can also set these pre-screeners, but they are quite expensive. Like for each demographic variable, you have to pay about 10 to 50 cents per participant. But on Prolific, you can set your sample. If you want to sample from certain ethnicities only, you can do that. But my intuition would be that it would take a long time because the full Prolific sample is about 10,000 people in the US. And for example, if you want to recruit like Hispanics, I don't think they have more than 200 people total in the whole pool. So it might take like weeks until you get all of them.
Weeks is okay. We're used to years. So,
no.
I mean, we did like Oana study that she described in the lab. We measure physiology at the same time, and it would probably take like 2 years to collect the full sample. So
No, so like in terms of like online experimenting, like in my studies, when it takes more than a single afternoon, I'm already worried that it's going too slow.
Okay, yeah, we move in slow motion compared to that. So
I guess it is just important for me to keep in mind like that I'm going to flood that one demographic and I can't like do the study 3 with them, or like I have to give my best study because like I can't do it again.
That's always a serious concern if you, for example, run a series of studies and participating in one makes people ineligible to participate in future studies. So then you have to think carefully. So maybe you want to pilot it on Mturk and then switch it for real study to Prolific. So there are several ways to deal with that. Or maybe you can even pilot it with other participant pools like university students.
well, this was super useful. At least I think a lot of people will find this super useful. In the end, especially talking about Mturk versus Prolific, I think, I don't know, I learned a lot. I'm sure you all did too. And we are forever grateful for you. You have like saved our lab during this crazy time. We can still do the kinds of studies we were doing before, and we really owe you a huge gratitude for that. So thank you for helping us, for coming here today, and you know, being so responsive over email. I think Oana was like shocked because, you know, people aren't usually that responsive. So yeah, it's been awesome. Does anyone else have any kind of last minute questions or suggestions?
I have 2 like off the record questions. So one is, how long did it take you to do this? And the other is how much, or yeah, I guess how much JavaScript or like computer programming background did you have when you started doing this?
Okay, the second question is easier to answer because it's not at all. Like I didn't have any background. I never took any courses in computation or anything. So it's only just Stack Overflow and Google. Like I was interested in how to set up. And to be honest, I started playing with JavaScript in Qualtrics like 6 years ago, like implementing dynamic stimuli and just playing around with different parts of Qualtrics. And then I started developing this platform about 2 years ago when I was working for my own studies. And then I don't know in terms of hours, like how many hours I already put in it. Probably it's in the range of thousands by now. But most of it was this first stage when I was just developing it for myself. But after I figured out and it was working, the rest was pretty easy. So that was just fine tuning it and adding these like extra features like the original version, for example, didn't have any customization. So you couldn't like change the text, you couldn't change the times and these things. So these were added later after I started releasing these versions, and I get a lot of feedback from people all around the world, and they wanted to, for example, the chat function wasn't in it either. That's also something that I added later. And basically it was a learning process for me as well, that I try to figure out what people really need, what are the features that they're looking for, and what are features that they really don't need. For example, first I thought that they are going to use these really complex economic interactions a lot, like auctions and market interactions. And I know that I created these examples, but so far, basically, no one has ever used those. On the other hand, I realized that negotiation and chat is extremely popular because a lot of research labs are doing research on those aspects. So that's one of the most important features there now. So yeah, I can't tell you the answer, like how much time it took me. It's a lot of time, but now I feel that because so many people are using it, I hope that this made like a contribution to research.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people using it, but I know that for our lab and for my study, at least, like Tessa's not kidding. Whenever we do go back to running that study in the lab, it's going to take 2 or 3 years, maybe at this point, who knows? But yeah, it's a total lifesaver. So thank you. And it's also just incredible that you didn't have background in computer science.
Yeah, a lot of people assume that I have background in computer science because I'm at Carnegie Mellon, but I never even took a course here in computer science. And you just mentioned the lab, and I want to add, so this platform, just like most of these online platforms, you can also set up the standard lab study with that. So that's the good thing. So it doesn't really matter what kind of device you're using. You can set it up on iPads. So for example, we did a field study at the University of Utah, and people were matched in physical labs. This was before the pandemic, and they interacted in person, but using this platform. So it's also feasible if you want to continue data collection in the real lab.
That's awesome.
Great. So any last parting words, anyone?